Can freebies really develop a state?
The state giving something to people is somehow basically wrong, is a complete fallacy. Manifestos given by both the major parties in Himachal Pradesh and Gujarat, including the BJP, have given lists of so-called freebies that are like pages long. It was much better to give free bus rides to women than to give 25,000 rupees per person to 100,000 people for two-wheelers. Who should get what, and ensuring that only those people get it. Limit for economically weaker is 8 lakh is hugely wrong. Now if you say you're going to reserve 10% of the quota for people who can make up to 8 lakhs, not 5 times per capita level, and then call that economically weaker. If you put 10% of the quota for people who in theory should be only around 2, 3, 4% of the population, the cutoff mark for the EWS quota is almost always much lower than the OBC, MBC levels, and in many cases lower than the Adi Dravidar SC, ST levels. Thank you for inviting me, Professor. And I'm happy to be on the stage with my good friend and colleague in the planning department, Dr. Jayaranjan. I don't have any real prepared remarks, so let me maybe just lay out 2 philosophical statements that are at the basis for what we're talking about in terms of business, human resource development, and the model. At the core, what is the role of democracy? Why do we organize ourselves in a country that calls itself a democracy? Why do we have a constitution? Why do we go through elections? Why is this the preferred model of government for most parts of the world? I think that's the basic question. And I have interpreted in multiple places that in the organization of business, if you have capitalism and free markets at one end, it's very hard to run a communist country as a democracy. It's very clear that quickly the party becomes much more powerful than the people, and that's every country you can see around the world that has ever been communist. Equally, it's very hard to run a capitalist society that is not democratic, because somewhere you have to keep the checks and balances in place, that those who become victorious in the capitalist competitive model do not get to take control of the administration of the government, the country, the resources. So if that is the case, then though almost all free market countries are democracies, the heart of the democratic function of a government is to sustain the social construct and the government role in such a way that free markets continue to function freely without getting captured, without having huge winners and many losers, and keeping society cohesive and everybody vested in the system that they exist in. And that's really what, in my opinion, the core role of democracy is. The core role of democracy is to keep society at peace, calm. Everybody believes they're getting a fair shake, or most people believe they're getting a fair shake, and there is no need for either social revolution or the kind of workers' revolution that Karl Marx predicted would be the end of capitalism and free markets. If that is the basic construct of democracy, then in most countries of the world, the debate is between what would be considered a left-leaning model or a right-leaning model, in the sense that the left-leaning model sees a greater role for government, sees a more active redistribution, greater regulation, greater constraints on corporate or individual behavior. And the rightist model reduces all of those. It assumes that people can reach equilibrium, the market will enforce its own discipline, and that businesses can thrive and sustain themselves and effectively not lead to oligopolies, monopolies, market breakdowns, crashes, structures, etc. In most countries, that would be the case. The real political debate is between more left or more right. And that's true in most advanced economies in Europe, in the US, in Australia, most parts of the developed non-communist world. That's what politics is about. But as the director pointed out, in India, we have a unique situation. Of course, we are all, as individuals, we are shaped by our experiences, by our path in life. A lot of our thinking is driven by what we have learned or what we have experienced, whether we know it consciously or subconsciously. As a country and as a culture and as a society, that's also true. So when we come from a land that has thousands of years of history, culture, some of it great, some of it not so good, because it created a hierarchy of the existence of human beings through things like the caste system, then a lot of our politics is driven or derivative of our history. That's really the root of the Dravidian model. It is what is otherwise a normal left-leaning model adapted to the history of our culture, of our society, of our land. And so, as the director said, the core of the Dravidian model is the equality of all human beings by birth. Men, women, caste, all of this should not matter. Everybody should have the same rights, opportunities, access, permissions, and equal social mobility prospects. And that's really the core of the Dravidian model. It is about social justice, it's about equality of opportunity, it's about progress through access to education, access to upliftment. So it is a unique leftist model for our history and our culture. And that's really the core of Dravidianism. But unlike many societies, in our state, at least for the last, 70, bulk of the years since independence, and in fact one would argue the bulk of the last century, there has not been a real pushback against this notion of how society should be structured. What should be the role of government? There's been very little debate, if you actually see, in the assembly proceedings or in the social construct or in public meetings or political platforms. There's not anybody really pushing back against the core of the Dravidian philosophy of any party. In fact, like most things, it comes down to the execution. The model is only as successful as the results, and therefore is only as validated as the results and the outcomes. Now, I would argue that in many ways the Dravidian model has been validated more than any other, at least in my understanding of the world, because it's hard to see either any other state, or for that matter any other country, burdened with the legacy that we were burdened with, to have made the kind of progress that we have made in the last 75 years since independence. Tamil Nadu as a state is one of the 4 large rich states of India, but unique among those 4 in terms of human development, social development, inclusion, social justice. All of our results are far apart from the other 3 large rich states. And yet, if you ask me today, do I think the movement and our values have reached their potential? The answer is absolutely not. It is hugely inefficient in execution. And this is not about political party A or B. I think, my party does better than the other one, but that's not the point. The point is that the system is not yet been brought to the level of execution where we should see the full benefits of these values and these philosophies and these approaches. I don't want to get into too much more now, because then we'll save that for the debate. But I'll just add 2 other things because of the topics here. What is the notion of good human resource management and human development? I have had the luxury of running large teams across tens of countries in my professional career, and then, in my role as the HRM minister for the government of Tamil Nadu, we have between government itself, PSUs, local bodies, and kind of contract employees and so forth, probably between 10 and 15 lakh people who work for the government of Tamil Nadu. The principles of human resource management and human talent development have advanced greatly, or our understanding of them and our understanding of organizational design, of psychology, of incentive alignment have all, at least at a global level, become very, very refined. You know, in places that I used to work, like investment banks or big consulting firms, there's a very clear understanding what is right, how you should get there, and so forth. I would say that's not the case in much of government. We have very few levers of control. The system is not designed particularly well. In fact, it's designed quite badly. And I have never seen such a large organization with such archaic organizational constructs anywhere else. But you are not going into government, most of you, you're going into the private sector. In the private sector, I think also the principles of the Dravidian movement apply in the human resource management area, in the sense that even in places like the largest investment banks and commercial banks of the world where I worked, in my time, I went out of my way to increase diversity, the percentage of female candidates that were interviewed and therefore hired, as well as the range of institutions from which we selected on-campus interview candidates. Because the diversity of thought, there are two main goals in that, in my perspective. One is, the more diverse the group you have inside your organization, the more likely you will have a robust debate and arrive at superior outcomes, rather than all people of one mindset going one way. The second is, most businesses, one way or the other, eventually interact with society, either as customers, as captives, as suppliers. And the more your organization reflects the makeup of the society you operate in, the more likely that you're attuned to your market, your customers, and you can achieve successful outcomes. So I think at the core of it, this notion that diversity gives us more healthy debates. If structured properly, equal rights and equal access to everybody gives us superior outcomes. And that we are trying to eradicate, or at least alleviate, the effects of centuries, if not millennia, of some discrepancies in our society, really drives much of our thinking. I would say we still have a long way to go. As proud as I am that I am a fourth generation member in this movement, as committed as I am to the values, I still feel that from an implementation, from an execution capability, we have miles and miles to go. And that's what drives me to work every day, to keep trying to get better outcomes for the people. So I'll stop there and then participate in the questions. Thank you.
In fact, my major complaint was that we have been talking about the Dravidian model for so many years now, but hardly any academic institution asked us to come and present the case or argue with us. In fact, we got very little output from the established institutions. In that sense, I greatly appreciate the effort by the LIBA to invite us and to talk about its suitability for the business model. Of all the topics, this was the very unique kind of a topic that I got to speak about. Now I would like to take off from where our Honorable Minister has left. He was talking about the democracy. I would like to remind you of what Dr. Ambedkar, when he presented the Constitution, the final draft to the Constitutional Assembly, when it was about to be adopted, or after the adoption of the Constitution. He said, we have ensured one person, one vote, which means you are getting the political democracy straight away. Whereas many countries have struggled for so many years to get political democracy, one person, one vote kind of a situation. We straight away give you that, or we have got that. But I would like to warn you about one possibility. Unless you strive to make or work the social and economic democracy in the country, this political democracy will not survive. That was the warning that he gave. And with all pride, I would say, Tamil Nadu is the only state, because of the adoption of the Dravidian model, we have strived to win over the economic and social democracy. No other state has done that. And that is a sure way towards a full-fledged freedom. And I would like to remind you of another quote by Abraham Lincoln. He said, democracy is not a state where you can reach. Okay, it is a goal. You have to strive towards that all the time. Similarly, Dravidian model is not something, like scoring something like 100 out of 100. It's not that. It is a journey and it has to continue, because new issues will come, new challenges will come, and we have to keep on solving all those challenges, encounter all those challenges, and devise strategies and implement efficiently the strategies that we devise and get the results so that we can move ahead. So with those words, I would say that whether it is good for the business or not. And again, I would like to substantiate what our Honorable Minister has said. He says, for any business, a good market is a boon. And he gave you some evidences about the purchasing power of the people in Tamil Nadu. Now, how it had come about? If you take, let us say, the year 1980, per capita income of Bihar, UP, or for that matter, you take any northern states, it was almost on par with, we were on par with them. You take after 1990, what has happened is, now it is 3 times, 3.5 times, 4 times more, particularly in the southern and the western states compared to the north and the east. How this has come about? We have our own strategies, we have our own development trajectories. And Tamil Nadu is the only state where you find the inequality is much lower compared to the west as well as the other southern counterparts. Now, that is the best thing to happen for the market, I would say. That is precisely why you find such a huge kind of income that is available to be spent in this state. How this has come about? First is, we have democratized the development process. That is the best thing that has happened to our state. And people look at it as a freebies culture. In fact, I would say that when they started expanding the public distribution system, it unshackled the masses, rural masses. And that eventually led them to diversify into various other occupations other than agriculture. So much so that the population depending on agriculture, solely depending on agriculture, is one among the lowest in the country. And the recent data suggests that only 4 to 4.5% of the population in Tamil Nadu, rural population in Tamil Nadu, depend purely on agriculture, because their livelihood as well as the earning capacity has diversified so much that depending entirely purely on agriculture has come down drastically. That is precisely why, when so many suicides were happening in the neighboring states, in Kerala, in Karnataka, and in Andhra, Maharashtra, all these developed states, Tamil Nadu didn't suffer that crisis. Very few suicides happened here because of the economic crisis. That is because of the democratization of the development process. And the entire success of this is the bedrock of that success is the kind of model that we have adopted. But from the business point of view, I would say that to second what our Honorable Minister has said, if we can ensure the further democratization of the development process, and that would be the best thing to happen for the capital as well as for the business. With those words, I think I will stop here so that we can take more questions. Thank you.
If you look around the world, and somebody please do this, go and look at the per capita GDP or the quality of life or the rating of livability of cities, and compare that to the extent of social welfare and inclusion that governments practice. And you will find that, again, this goes to the heart of democracy. If you want to have successful capital markets and free markets, you must have a successful democracy. Of course, there's a means, and that is good institutions. Good institutions, strong, independent institutions, ensure that the market remains free and that the optimal outcome in terms of growth, per capita results, business margins, all of that come out. So, at an underlying philosophy, if you have an inclusive society and high distribution with relatively high per capita incomes and purchasing power. It's of course great for business. That's what business wants. I mean, business is in the business of making profit, right? That's the definition of a business, is that you want to succeed, you want to get market share, you want to improve your returns, your margins, your results. And that's a lot easier to do in a well-functioning society. Capital investments are much easier to do when society is stable, when the law and order condition is good, when the rules are clear, when the institutions are strong. Everybody is able to predict what the risks that may occur in the pursuit of rewards are. And therefore, it's a lot easier to do investment decisions. It's a lot easier to attract capital when your society is calm, harmonious, and inclusive. And I would say, just look into this one other variable. One of the things about Tamil Nadu that separates us from, let's say, Maharashtra or Gujarat is the per capita purchasing power. You look at the percentage of consumer spending, and again, you will find that you have much more purchasing capacity in the average citizen in Tamil Nadu, which must by definition be good for business because you want to sell them something, a good or a service. So I would say the model is also good for business.
The one question which is repeated almost about more than 5-6 times is the freebies. Can freebies really develop a state? Which is the question that has been repeated.
See, the word freebies itself is a misleading word, right? Every state, everywhere in the world, every country gives something at either low or zero or subsidized cost to its citizens. In fact, if you take places like Australia, you get free healthcare, you get free education. You take places like Scandinavia, which have one of the best qualities of life, highest per capita incomes, hugely successful multinational, international businesses. They have something like a 1-year government-paid paternity leave, not just maternity, paternity leave. So this notion that the state giving something to people is somehow basically wrong is a complete fallacy. I'll get the politics out of the way first. After all these debates that have been going on at the national level, I don't know if any of you have kept up with the manifestos given by both the major parties in Himachal Pradesh and Gujarat. Both, including the BJP, have given lists of so-called freebies that are like pages long that they're going to do. And my friend, the Honorable Union Finance Minister, tweeted some 15 of these as a statement of how women were going to benefit should the BJP come back to power in Himachal Pradesh. So let's get the politics out of the way. Now the reality is, what is at the core of freebies, right? There are only two real questions. The first question is, are you making people lazy and dependent by giving them something that they otherwise could have earned? Question one. Question two, should it be given universally to everybody, or do you really find those in need? I don't think anybody in any society says, find those in real need and don't give them something, right? So those are taken for granted. So the real question is, how universal should it be, and what kinds of things should be supplied by the state or given by the state or covered by the state? And I've talked extensively on this many places, so I'll try to be as brief as I can. I think there are things that the state does which are critical, right? If we don't give free food in schools, we're now expanding it to free breakfast or school-provided breakfast, then we will not be investing in the nutritional development and therefore the physical development and therefore the mental capacity to learn of our children. Any society's competitiveness in the global market that we all exist in today is defined primarily by your weighted average productivity of your citizens. And if you cannot get them the right nutrition and the right education when they are young, everything else is lost after that. If you don't bring them from birth, from maternity to, let's say, a teenage with full nutrition and full access to education, after that, all your other interventions are irrelevant. You cannot make up for that loss. So whatever we do on those things, I think it's beyond debate that those are critical. And I don't think we're doing it in such a way that it is making anybody lazy. And we're certainly not doing it in all schools. We're not doing it in rich people's schools. We're not doing it in affluent areas and so forth. So those and all should be beyond debate. There's a whole other set of government-sponsored schemes like health insurance, like what used to be the Tali Kitangam and the marriage assistance schemes, which I have defended, saying they're like insurance against falling into a debt trap if it was executed right. We didn't change away from the Tali Kitangam to the Pudumai Pen scholarship scheme because we were against that. We changed because it had not been implemented for 4 years, and therefore the backlog was so high, and the risk mitigation value, that is to prevent a family falling into debt for a child's wedding, that value had already been lost because it had been 4 years since the wedding had happened for some people, and 3 for some, and 2 for some others. So we changed it. So if there is a risk mitigation program, whether it's crop insurance, health insurance, life insurance, accident insurance, or falling into debt insurance for special events like weddings, then it's justifiable. If you start looking at certain freebies, I personally am a huge critic of the so-called 25,000 rupees to get a two-wheeler, because it was minuscule. It affected only 100,000 people out of a state of 8 crore, out of 3.5, 3.8 crore that work in a state where we're trying to promote a public transport system. For example, it was much, much, much better to give free bus rides to women than to give 25,000 rupees per person to 100,000 people for two-wheelers, because that is, again, pollution-inducing, extra crowding. We don't even have the infrastructure to have those existing two-wheelers. We're already like the most dense two-wheeler state in the country. We have 2.33 crore ration cards and something like 2.8 crore registered two-wheelers. No other state in this country is anywhere near that. It partly has to do with per capita income, purchasing power, etc. But we haven't built the roads or the parking or the traffic systems to cope with that. Why would we burden ourselves more? So clearly there are some things which are just poll gimmicks and which don't increase productivity either directly or indirectly or immediately, and don't reduce risk. Those I would consider to be wasteful. So let's leave the quality of the freebie or the nature of the freebie or the program aside. I, for one, am all for making sure it goes to the right people, because if it goes to people who don't need it, not only is it an inefficient way for you to spend the money of a limited resource that the government has, but if you give money for nothing to people who otherwise will not use it for core needs like food or clothing, then you are actually supplementing inflation. You are pumping increased money into the system for no increased productivity or no improved quality of life on an immediate level. So I personally am all for understanding who should get what and ensuring that only those people get it. For example, we give old age pension, widow's pension, differently able pension. I think we should do more of that. We should have better data, and we should give more money than we give now. I've raised this issue many times. I said, why is it that all the government servants get twice a year cost of living increases, but the old age pension and the widow's pension has not been increased for 10 years? Don't they have an inflation problem? Don't they purchase goods that also go up in cost? So I think, the more you target, the greater the efficiency of the government spending, and the lower the likelihood that you will get unintended consequences like inflation or other malfeasance. I'll give you another example. If you give money as cash, in my view, there are a lot of things that could go wrong with that. I don't want to go too much into the details, but when we gave the 4,000 rupees per card, as the Chief Minister promised, and as he directed us to do in 21 during the depth of the crisis, best thing we did, we were happy to spend the money, it lifted the bottom of the pyramid, it kept us from going deeper into recession. All those things were true. But there were many, many instances where people who had never ever used a ration shop before the 4,000 rupees and never come to the ration shop after the 4,000 rupees still took the 4,000 rupees. Then you ask the question, if that many, and it was not like few, right? It was lakhs. If that many lakhs of people have never come before or after, is it that people who don't otherwise need government subsidies decided to come just because they wanted the 4,000 rupees? Or is it that the data systems are so poor that we can't really tell who's taking and not taking? So these kinds of complications arise when you start trying to execute without proper information. And so the last thing I'd say is, to do the right kind of targeting, you need a lot of information and you need to cross-reference a lot of different data sets that already exist. And that's what we announced in 2021 in our budget as part of the data purity project. And it has hugely helped us, especially in things like the dual loan waiver. Our costs have been dramatically reduced by cross-referencing and finding the kind of people who otherwise, let's say, had 100 sovereigns of jewelry and they pledged it in 12 different or 15 different places because of the 5 sovereign limit. So we were able to eliminate a lot of those, and that saved us a lot of money and a lot of bad outcomes.
I have another question. I'll ask the question, but I will allow you to sip the coffee, but chew it on. You talk about inclusive growth. What's the problem with the economically weaker section to be given percentage in the reservation? You can have coffee, but I would like to ask Professor Jayaranjan. Most of the villages still practice untouchability in many ways. But how far we have improved on this and how we have eradicated by implementing the Dravidian model?
What you are saying is true. As I have stated in my opening remarks, it's a long journey. Okay, if you imagine what was the situation like, let us say in 1960 or 1970, and what is the situation now? Now you will see the difference, what kind of difference that we are experiencing the lives of the rural masses. During the 1960s and 1970s, the substantial rural population was depending on the landholders even for their food, even for the next meal they had to depend on them. So you can imagine the kind of servile relation that prevailed then. Okay, now that has changed, but that doesn't mean that they are completely free. They are free in the sense they are free to seek their livelihood. That's why the level of diversification, economic diversification that has happened in the state is so high. And that is precisely why what our Honorable Minister has just said, 2.8 crore two-wheelers are registered vehicles. Why that is required? That is required because of the kind of diversification that has taken place. And if you see the rural non-farm employment that has happened here is phenomenal. Okay, that kind of freedom we could achieve. But that doesn't mean that the social stigma associated with the caste and the hierarchy has disappeared. It will take lot more of a time. And we have to struggle for that, and that can happen on two fronts. One, you need to have the economic freedom, and simultaneously you need to have social organizations which will strive for this kind of social reforms. So that's what now we are trying to do all the time. And that is a long journey.
So thank you. I will come back to that free schemes that you have done a research. So I'll come back to you. Honorable Minister, just now you said inclusive growth you talk about.
Yeah,
so why don't you have this?
Again, I'll be very brief. I think we have, at least I have 4 basic problems with this EWS as it's structured. The first is that, as I say, you need strong independent institutions that give consistent rulings. So when you already have Supreme Court rulings that say that you cannot give reservations based on economic circumstances, and I assume the underlying philosophy is that economic circumstances change much more rapidly. If you're born into a particular community that has had a few hundred years of discrimination, you can't change that tomorrow. But your economic circumstances can go both up and down much more quickly. And if you have a Supreme Court ruling that already, or a precedent that says there's a ceiling on reservations, etc., then to violate that seems like making the quality of the institution and the clarity of the law worse. And that's not good for democracy. But those are the practical things. The more profound things, if the limit for economically weaker is 8 lakh is hugely wrong. The per capita income in this country is 1.34 lakhs or something like that. And the cutoff for filing income taxes is 2.5, and the first rupee of income tax you start paying is 5 lakhs. And at that level, I'm told there are only about 1.8% of the population or something that is even at the 5 lakh level. Now if you say you're going to reserve 10% of the quota for people who can make up to 8 lakhs, I mean, your own definition of economically weaker is blown out of the water, because you only have the top of the pyramid only at 5 lakhs by the time you get to 8 lakhs. So if you really want to set the economically weaker, you should have set it at per capita level or below per capita level, or maybe 1.5 times per capita level, not 5 times per capita level, and then call that economically weaker. The term loses meaning when you're at 5 times. Therefore, what you see is that the reservation percentage also is giving very skewed results. If you put 10% of the quota for people who in theory should be only around 2, 3, 4% of the population, therefore you find the cutoffs for people wherever they have implemented the EWS quota, the cutoff mark for the EWS quota is almost always much lower than the OBC, MBC levels, and in many cases lower than the Adi Dravidar SC, ST levels. That means you have created an artificial low entry point, and our data around income and all that is very weak, right? We have a very small formal economy. I don't really know who's making how much. I can get a certificate saying anything in many cases. So the system in its conception has so many loopholes and so many flaws, and in outcome, it proves those to be true, because we're getting these grotesque outcomes that just because, so imagine that you have, somebody like me who was born into a forward community. If I could show that I had only 8 lakhs income, then I have a lower cutoff, or my son has a lower cutoff than somebody who has, 500 years of oppression and is already excluded in the creamy layer on the other side of the reservation. So it's just a perverse construct. That's the reason.
But they say among the forward caste, high caste, there are very poor and weak and abject poverty also.
There may be, but I'm saying then you have to figure out a better model than this, right? First of all, the whole question of whether current economic outcomes equates to centuries of oppression, that is a philosophical question. I don't agree with that, but other people may have a different view. That's a different story. But even if you have a valid argument that there are people who have, abject poverty, and if the Supreme Court didn't already have a ruling and therefore it was not an upset of the precedent, and if every other condition was true, I would still say the implementation and the cutoff levels for income need to be much lower and much better than they are now. How is 8 lakhs abject poverty, right? If per capita income is 130,
correct.
8 lakhs is not abject poverty, right?
Right. I'll take up this the schemes that you have done a research, and also the schemes, free schemes. When you talk about Dravidian model, it roots out corruption, also putting the money in the hands of people. But in your research, recently you have done a research, and the Chief Minister also quoted your research. And did it really reach the poor? Because United Nations, when they spend 70% they spent in their administrative, but trickle downs to people only 2%, 3% and all. Is this happening also in Tamil Nadu? That's one of the questions. I'm not asking questions. Huh? So questions asked by students and faculty.
Yeah, this the recent research is about the free bus travel that we have given to the women in the urban transport systems owned and operated by the state. Now, during the first phase, we had taken up the Chennai city alone, where we found that the women who use the public transport are essentially coming from the lower social strata as well as lower economic strata, and for them, the free bus travel makes a huge lot of a difference in terms of 20 to 25% of their monthly expenses, and that they could save now. And when you go to the rural areas, then we selected 3 different locations. One agrarian-based location, that is Nagapattinam district. The other one is an industrial location, that is Tirupur. The third one is Madurai, where a mix of both. Where you find the benefits that accrue to the women, lower strata, social and economic strata women, ranges from, let us say, 18 to 22% of their monthly expenses. But these are all the benefits that you see immediately. There are cascading effects, which we are unable to capture as of now. Like for instance, in your introductory remark, you said the higher participation, labor force participation, that we have to work out. We have to wait and see how it plays out. That is one. And secondly, the new kind of empowerment that women may enjoy. The third one is in terms of access to higher education, in combination with, let us say, the new scheme that our Honorable Minister was talking about, that's Pudmai Pen. Pudmai Pen, we give you 1,000 rupees for any graduation or any post-metric program for every month. Along with a free bus travel, may enable a lot more of rural girls to get into the educational stream and also to get into the labor force. On the one hand, you find the younger people who have already diversified and moved out of agriculture, a lot more of them. Now this new bus travel will enable them to seek further and further new opportunities. And that benefit now we haven't calculated. What we have calculated is just the saving that has happened because of the free bus travel. And as I have told you that it has immense cascading effect, and that has not been worked out. And that needs to be worked out.
I just want to add one thing. Still on, yeah. I just want to add on this Pudmai Pen. I just got some data the other day. When we announced it, we said anybody who would have qualified based on this criteria, was already in second year, third year, other courses, Polytechnic, ITI, also can apply. And maybe it's a slow awareness, maybe it's some other problems, but I think we got only about 2 lakhs or 1.8 or 2.2 or something. We were expecting up to 4-5 lakh people. But the first year students who have joined this year, we've already got almost 1 lakh applications, right? And this is through the banks and all we're working. We just had the meeting the day before, so that's why I have the data. So one of two things is true. Either the awareness is greater among the entering students compared to the existing students. Because otherwise, if I'm going to get 1 lakh in 1 year, then second year, third year, plus, second year Polytechnic, all these things, I should have 4 or 5 lakh applications. I have not got that. Or, in fact, because we're giving the money, and possibly because they can go by free bus, more people have decided to go to college this time than decided last year or the year before that. Right? I mean, we don't have the data yet to tell which is which. But we see effects immediately when we announce some of these schemes, because that was the whole ambition. When we said Tamil Nadu is #1 in the country, 52% gross enrollment ratio in higher education, while we're very proud of that, there's a huge discrepancy between private school and public school college going and male and female college going, and the bottom of all enrollment ratios is girls coming out of government schools. So when we give this 1,000 rupees, if there is any connectivity between intent and outcome, then we should see a huge jump in girls who choose to continue their education rather than drop out because they can't afford it, right? So I think these are the programs that we need much more data, like the study for the bus, then we can tell really what's happening.
The last question to both of you, last comment. Can we teach this as a business model to our students? Sir?
If you are teaching ethics and business, I think you can very well teach the Dravidian model and as a development model.
Yeah, financial model?
Yeah, I mean, again, I go back to the core, right? The nature of most corporations is to increase market share, increase profit, increase margin, grow the business. If you want to do that, a calm, stable, predictable environment with consumers who have purchasing capacity and a workforce that has productivity helps you in every way. Because every business today, whether you like it or not, you're in a global competition. Right? Even if you're a SME, there's people who can import and sell, or people who, other SMEs who are competing with you. So in the sense that this model increases weighted average productivity, increases per capita purchasing power, and increases the likelihood of a harmonious society, all these are crucial to successful business outcomes. Therefore, I think it's eminently suitable that we should teach this to business people.
I think my faculty have to be convinced about this. I think I get the nod of area chairs in front of me. I think this will be the closing remarks.